Sometimes when we talk about the Scriptures, we think St. Paul is the one who pulls no punches. But if we've been listening for the last few weeks to the readings from St. James, we find out that St. James does exactly the same thing. And today we find him in that second reading saying, so think about it. What causes war and conflict? Is it not your passions? And let me ask you this, he says further. Have you thought about the fact that it gets you nowhere? Have you thought about the fact that when you're trying to satisfy your passions and not trying to follow the Lord, it gets you nowhere? In the Gospel, we find Jesus says to his disciples, you know what? I am going to have to suffer and die. And that is the way the promise of the Father is going to be fulfilled. But it goes right over their heads. They completely miss the point. And so as they begin to walk along, you can almost hear it. I'm a better follower of Jesus than you are. Actually, I'm a better fisherman than you are. I follow what he says much more closely than you do. Hey, I'm the greatest of the apostles. I'm the first one that was called. And all of a sudden Jesus says to them, so tell me, what were you talking about on the road? And they know immediately that what they were talking about was far removed from what he would ask them to talk about. And they don't answer. They don't answer. And then he does something that they probably thought was really strange. Would you come here for a minute? What he does is he takes a little child and he puts his arm around that child and he says to everybody, you know what? Unless you accept a child like this, you're not living the way I called you to live. Thank you for helping. Okay? So what exactly did he mean by that? Well, he's talking about, first of all, recognizing the child within ourselves. And understanding, as he says elsewhere, that we must be as little children. And that means open to what he wants us to do. When I asked him, what's your first name? Lindsay? Lindsay. When I asked Lindsay to come up here, she came right up. How many adults would have come right up? What we say, what he's saying is we must be open as children are open. But there's another thing, too. Because you need to understand that in that time, children really were not considered to have any kind of status. They were just children. And maybe someday they'd be adults that would take their place in society, but at that time, they had no purpose other than to simply be children. So when Jesus called this child up, he was saying to his disciples, you need to understand that your message and your love, your compassion, everything you do must reach out to absolutely everyone. From the youngest child to the oldest adult. And so what we find between St. James and the Gospel today is that we are called to put aside our own passions and let the love of Christ be what flows through us and what touches other people. But then we get to the Book of Wisdom. And when we listen to that reading from the Book of Wisdom, we are told that to do what Jesus is asking us to do what St. James is asking us to do, is not easy. It's not easy because there are those who don't want to hear the message. It's not easy because those who persecute the messenger. It's not easy Because there is always a barrier between human passion and the gospel of Jesus Christ. And as we listen to the Word of God today, we are reminded that we should let nothing keep that barrier in our way. But we are to live as Christ and let Christ live within us. We are to be messengers of His love and His peace and His compassion and His mercy. And if we are willing to do that, if we are willing to put ourselves aside and let Jesus be first, then we are walking the road that He calls us to walk. And that is the road that will bring us into the fullness